this week, we are highlighting hurricane heroes, people who stepped up during disastrous storms to make a big difference.
And we certainly all saw the devastation left behind in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. But when a woman in Pennsylvania saw it, she made a life-changing decision to help by moving to New Orleans.
Christina Drake joins us live to talk about it. Christina, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about this. What was it that motivated you to move 1,000 miles or more away from home down into Louisiana after Katrina?
Well, I had wanted to come down right afterwards, but I still had my youngest child ready to finish high school. So 2 years later, I had become ill and ended up losing my job over that illness, and sat down that day and looked up and said, God, what do I do now? And I just can't even explain how clear the answer was. And it was, now you go to New Orleans and you help. And so I sold everything that except for what could fit in my car, looked for an organization to work with, and ended up going into the AmeriCorps program at Presbyterian South Louisiana project called Project Homecoming, and learned how to swing a hammer and eventually to build many houses.
What did your friends back home, the original home, think of you just getting rid of everything and going? What were they telling you?
They thought I was crazy. They just didn't understand it. And I heard that for the 10 years that I was in New Orleans. But it's easy to explain. 2 months after I got to New Orleans, it was clear to me that that was home, and it was actually the first place I'd ever felt that way, and that the need was so massively great that I just couldn't leave, and so I continued to do that work for almost 10 years.
Now, you mentioned how the need was so incredibly great. What challenges did you face in trying to help some of the victims there of Katrina?
Well, funding, of course, was the biggest issue, and people were scattered all over the country after Hurricane Katrina and waiting to come home. In fact, the last home that I finished about a year and a half ago, the family had been living in Oklahoma waiting for over 11 years to get back home.
Wow, I mean, the stories are never ending from that storm, right?
Yeah.
It's more than a decade later. You're still in Louisiana, still helping. What, made you stay? And talk about some of the other storms that you've seen, including last year's flooding in the Baton Rouge area.
Well, what makes me stay is the people. They have probably more faith in their little pinky nail than most other people have in their entire bodies, and they just are so resilient that instead of coming down and inspiring them, I found that it was quite the opposite. And, of course, Louisiana, there's always going to be another disaster. And last August, actually, it was in my last week at that project in New Orleans when the 2016 August flood happened. It flooded 22 parishes. Over 100,000 homes were destroyed. And so just coming out of New Orleans, I was asked to come up and head the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance efforts in the rest of Louisiana.
Now, Christina, as we've got about 30 seconds, how have you seen things changed here in the last 10 years since you've been there in the New Orleans area?
New Orleans made great strides, but as far as disaster, we still have the same problems. People not knowing about the damage in the storm and the extent of it, and getting volunteers in to help. We desperately need them in Baton Rouge and all the other 22 parishes because a year after last year's storm, I mean, we are barely moving.
Well, hopefully this interview and this time on the Weather Channel reminds everyone that there's still a lot of work to go. Christina Drake, thanks so much for inspiring all of us as a hurricane hero today.